Evening, everyone. Oh, that was excellent. Thank you very much. Okay. All right. Before we get started, we're going to ask Ralph to lead us in a quick prayer, and then we will get started in chapter 32. Amen. All right. Okay. Have you guys done your hand exercises? Ready to go? All right. Chapter 32, the books of Exodus. The Lord willing, we'll finish the book of Exodus tonight. Chapter 32. All right. What we're going to see here in these next three chapters, we see the record of the apostasy of Israel while Moses was up on Mount Sinai. Okay, because there are going to be several apostasies of Israel, but this one specifically, he was up on Mount Sinai kind of doing something important. He was speaking with God. God was speaking to him. So he was busy with that. And remember, we saw earlier that Moses was gone up there for how long? 40 days, yeah, so this is not like a weekend or something. He's up there for a while. And who do you leave in charge? Aaron. Okay, now you take care of everything while I'm gone, talking to God. Make sure everybody behaves themselves. Well, we're going to see how that works out. So the people, they become really restless. They, days are going by, and where's Moses? Why has he not come back down? I guess they expected God to be brief, and God will do it the way he wants to do it. So the people, they get restless, and they ask Aaron to make a god for them, an idol, so that they can worship. Okay? And so what Aaron should have done is what? No, we're not going to do that. We are here to worship the true God. I'm not going to make a fake idol for you. Did we not just leave all those behind in Egypt? Did you not see how powerless they were against the one true God? No, I'm not going to do that. If you guys want to do it, you'll do it without me, because I'm not going to do it. That's what he should have said, but that's not what he said. So they said, you need to make us an idol. And Aaron said, yeah, sure, okay, we can do that. So he takes some gold, and what does he make out of it? A golden calf, would look something like that. Well, we're getting to that. Yeah. I'm starting out what he really did, and then we're going to say what he said he did. Right? So he makes this calf for them to worship as their deliverer, where, again, the true God is the one who's really delivering them, has delivered them from the Egyptians, and will eventually deliver them into the promised land of Canaan. But now it's this cow that's taking us home, right? So Aaron also makes an altar, and therefore they can sacrifice to this idol, and they feasted. Okay, so this turns into a big party, and Aaron claimed that this was acceptable worship. Now remember, this guy, he's going to be the high priest. So he claimed that this was acceptable worship. Well, surely if the high priest says it's okay, then it's okay, right? No? Y'all don't think so? Yeah. This was not okay. So just because he said it was, that didn't make it true. Okay? And so many people, do they not do the same kind of thing today? I mean, it may not be a golden calf, but yeah, so you have certain, religious leaders who they will change the worship of God to what they want. And I think this is a good thing, so that makes it okay. And the attitude is they believe that God is obligated to accept whatever worship they offer. Yeah, I'm doing it for the Lord, so he's got to accept that. I mean, that's their attitude. Now, is there any biblical truth to that? No. It's pretty arrogant for us to say, you know, God, I'm going to offer to you what I want, and you're just going to have to accept it. You don't need to be so strict. You need to quit telling me what to do. Just let me worship you the way I want to. And as we said, you don't have to go too far in the Bible to find out how false that idea is. All you got to do is check with Cain, who offered worship to God, but God most assuredly did not accept it because Cain didn't do what God told him to do. Cain might have had that same well, I offered something up to you. I mean, it should have been good enough, Lord. Why didn't you accept it? It wasn't what he told Cain to do. And we don't know. It's not recorded. We don't know exactly what he told him to do. What we do know is he didn't do it, whatever it was. Okay? And so some people today think just because their preacher says something or their elder says something, but it's against this book, well, you know, the elders say it's okay, or my preacher told me it was fine. That doesn't make it okay if it doesn't go along with what the Bible says. And we need to understand that, and we need to appreciate that. So Aaron said it was fine, but it is most assuredly not going to be fine. It's not true just because he said that it was. So again, that's what we see in the first 6 verses there. And then verse 7 through 14. God, of course, knows all this is going on. And this is really all you need to know about. Well, I wonder if, you know, since Aaron said it was okay, was it okay? How did God react to this? Was he pleased or angry? Yeah, he was angry about this. So angry, in fact, that he decided to destroy them. Okay? And he was going to fulfill the promise. So, well, wait a minute. What about the promise to Abraham? He was going to switch that up and fulfill it through Moses' descendants, because all these other Israelites, they'd all gone off the deep end. So this, in a sense, was a test for Moses. So, hey, you mean everything could go through my family, and that's what God was willing to do. So would Moses sell out the Israelites for his own family's benefit? That's the temptation before him. Okay? But Moses will pass on that. He pleads with God, saying that, you know, look, Lord, you've already done so much for us. Please don't turn your back on. I know they're wrong. He's not saying what they did was right, but he's just pleading for God's mercy. And like Eric said a few minutes ago, yes, there are plenty of times in the Old Testament that we see the wrath of God, but here's a good example where we see the mercy of God too. Because certainly what they did with all this, would that, for a righteous God, a just God, would that warrant destruction? Absolutely it would. So God would have been justified in doing that. It wasn't like God, well, I'm going to destroy them. Well, that's immoral, or no. He'd have been justified to do that, but Moses pleads on their behalf and reminds God, you know, what are the Egyptians going to say? That you saved them from the Egyptians only to bring them out here and destroy them yourself. That's what the Egyptians will say, which will give them even more reason to turn their back on you. So don't do that. And he mentioned the promise to Abraham, to Isaac, to Jacob about their descendants possessing Canaan. So something interesting is it talks about God repented. Okay? Now, typically we think about repentance as, well, we're turning from the sins that we have committed. It's a change in behavior. It is godly sorrow. I'm not going to do those things anymore because I've done sinful things. I've transgressed God's law. So is that what it means here, that God repented? He had sin and... No. It's not talking about that at all. It's not the same sense as us. It's the idea here is there are times where God could allow different possible outcomes of a situation. And he will base that on our response to it. It could go this way, it could go that way, it could go that way, depending on what we do. Okay? And it's based on man's faithfulness. And so what Moses did was he convinced God to have mercy in this situation. So that's what it means there. And so God is going to do that. All right, so then in verses 15 through 29, finally after the 40 days, Moses comes down from the mountain. Now, we also read here that Joshua had been allowed to go near the mountain because, remember, God said nobody else was even to touch the mountain. But he allowed Joshua to go with Moses. Now, did Joshua go all the way up with Moses? No, he went part of the way up. So he wasn't with God and Moses, but neither was he down in the camp participating in what Aaron did and the others. So he had been part of the way up the mountain. So he and Moses, they come back down. Moses witnesses, he sees the debauchery that's going on. And so how does Moses react? Is he pleased or is he angry? He's angry too. What does he do to the Ten Commandments? He breaks them. He throws them down and destroys them. Okay, because he is so angry, he feels like they're not worthy to receive God's law. He is so upset with them for doing this. And something interesting about this, because people will say, well, you know, if you're a follower of God, and they weren't Christians, but for us today, well, if you're a Christian, you can't ever get mad. Is that true? No, there's such a thing as righteous anger. What did Jesus do to the money changers in the temple? Yeah, he cast them out. And it talked about he created a whip. Now, we don't know if he actually beat them from the temple, but he was prepared to do that. He had a righteous anger, right? You have turned my father's house into a den of thieves, right? So there is such a thing as righteous anger. That's what Moses had here. Okay, he is so upset with him because we don't see anywhere any condemnation from God rebuking Moses. How dare you destroy my commandments? There's none of that. There's nowhere does God chastise Moses for doing this. So this is righteous anger. And so Moses, he's going to fix their little red wagon, as we would say. He's going to melt that gold down. He's going to put it in some water, and he's going to make them drink it. I'm sure that would have been pretty disgusting. Right? But that's what he's going to do to them. Yeah, I'm sure it did. Yeah, it just makes me sick kind of thinking about if I had to drink something like that. That's just gross, right? But that's just a little bit of their punishment. That's step number one. So then Moses confronts his brother. And we get the gist of this conversation if you'd be a fly on the wall on this one, right? So he confronts Aaron. What in the world are you doing here? I left you in charge, and I come down here, and there's just total idolatry and chaos, and what in the world is going on? So Aaron, when he does this, of course, he takes full responsibility. I'm kidding. No, he doesn't. He blames the people. Well, no, it was all them. Did they threaten to break your arm if you didn't make that calf? Did they force you to do it? Well, not exactly, but it's their fault. You know, so he blames them. And then he goes on to say, as Larry pointed out a minute ago, well, you know, I just put that gold in there, and that calf just magically appeared. It just came out all by itself, forgetting that he carved it. Right? He just kind of left that part of the story out, but it just kind of created itself. You think Moses bought that? No, not at all. So he took no personal responsibility. First, he tried to blame all the Israelites, and they were to blame as well. And then it just miraculously created itself, right? Anybody but him. It's not my fault. I didn't do it. Moses sees that beyond all this, all the people are naked. Okay? And that's really what you see all through the Old Testament. Sexual immorality pretty much always accompanied idol worship. They always went hand in hand. Okay? The difference is, of course, these people, they really should have known better, but they didn't. So Moses then asked among the people, is there anybody here that's still on God's side? And some of them they were the Levites. Okay, and remember, Moses and Aaron came from the tribe of Levi. I mean, they were Levites. So the Levites came to him, and Moses told them, I want you to go through the camp, and I want you to kill a lot of people. Okay? Now, do you remember how many did they kill? 3,000, right? 3,000 people. Now, we're not told, was there a method to this? I mean, how did they select? Was it random, or did they select certain people? We're not told how they were selected, but this was the price for disobedience. And so they killed 3,000 people. Now, we know that God will not physically strike us down today for sin, but we will suffer the second death. We will suffer eternal condemnation if we live in sin and don't repent for that. So there is punishment for us, obviously, as well, and spiritual death is far worse than physical death. All right, verses 30 through 35. Moses tells them that they've sinned against God, which they should have known that anyway. But he also tells them, I'm going to appeal to God on your behalf. Not because they deserved it, but it's what Moses is going to do. And so he goes to God, he asks God to forgive them for what they've done. He basically says, if you don't want to do that, you might as well, you can take me out of the book of life. I really am asking you to do this. So again, it's not because they deserve it, but he's trying to, get God to exercise his abundant mercy, which he does have. And so God answers Moses, telling him, well, he's going to punish the guilty for their sins, and God will punish them. But he's not going to kill them all. But he does say that all those that are 20 years old and above, what is their sentence? What's their punishment? Yeah, they will never enter the land of Canaan. They won't see it. Okay? So they're going to wander, and Numbers 14 talks about this in some more detail, but yeah, they're going to perish during the next 40 years wandering in the desert. Okay, and so at that point, God tells Moses, I want you to continue taking the people toward Canaan, and we said they're going to take the scenic route. They're not going to do a direct route. But he also says that his angel will continue to guide them, and we are pretty sure that is who? That is Christ. And we looked at some New Testament verses about that. Yeah. All right, chapter 33. So in the first 6 verses, we see that Israel repents. Okay? God is still going to send his angel, Christ, to lead them and drive out the Canaanites when they get there. So God is still going to do that. But God tells Moses, my presence will not be with you. I'm still going to get you there, and I'm still going to drive out the Canaanites or give you the power to drive them out. But my presence is not going to be with you because these people are stubborn and they are rebellious. God often uses the term, what is it? Stiff-necked, right? This is a stiff-necked people. Stubborn and rebellious. And so God, the idea is, if my presence is with them, I'm going to have to wind up destroying them. So, not going to do it. They'd broken the covenant, right? And God was rightfully displeased about that. So, when the Israelites were told that, they had the proper attitude. They mourned. They realized, boy, we have really messed up. They mourned. It says they removed their ornaments. And so God says, well, I will decide what to do with them based on their future behavior. What are they going to do from this point? So verses 7 through 11, God tells them to halt construction of the tabernacle because they've broken the covenant. And so we see that Moses, he's going to erect a temporary tent because they're not going to construct the tabernacle. And this was a place for him to speak to God. And again, it kind of shows how the people had separated themselves from God because they didn't do what he said. It wasn't a tent of worship. That's what the tabernacle was supposed to be. This was not. So it did help the people realize how serious their sin had been. So it talks about every time Moses would enter the tent, they would all just anxiously watch him, waiting to see what God was going to do, because they realized what they had done. And when they would see the pillar of God appear, then they would bow down and worship him. Okay, now some interesting language we see here as well. It talks about that Moses is talking to God face to face. Now, is that literal? No. And Eric mentioned that, right? No man has seen God. You can't see God and live. So that doesn't mean literally face to face, but what it means is God is speaking to Moses directly. Could you imagine hearing the voice of God? I mean, man. And notice now when Moses goes to do this, you notice who he took with him and who he didn't take. He didn't take Aaron. He took Joshua. Okay? Probably because Joshua had not sinned because he wasn't in the camp with everybody else. Do what, Carmen? Yeah. So we see here verses 12 through 23, Moses meets with God. Once again, he intercedes on their behalf. And he just tells God, I don't even want to enter Canaan if you're not going to be with us. I don't even want to go. And he tells God, your presence, you being with us, that's what separates us from the Egyptians and everybody else. It's what makes us different. And so he really wants God to be with him again. So God agrees to that. And he says, okay, well, my presence will go with you. So what does that tell you about Moses? He's a very great, faithful man. Not sinless, but he is a great man that God would grant these kind of requests when God was rightfully angry about what had happened. But God is going to go along with what Moses wants because he is so pleased with Moses and how Moses is serving him. Okay? Now, is there kind of a parallel to us today? Who intercedes for us? Yeah, Jesus does, right? Not Moses, but Jesus does. Okay? In Romans 8:34, it says that. It talks about that Christ intercedes for us. He is the high priest, right? And a more perfect high priest than Aaron ever was or any of the others or could be. So it's at this point where Moses does ask to see God. Again, Eric talked about this in his class. No man can see God and live. But God allows Moses to see something, some kind of manifestation of him. It wasn't literally God, but some kind of manifestation. What did that look like exactly? We don't know because we're not told. Okay, but we do know it wasn't like he was literally staring at the face of God, but he saw God allowed him to see some kind of manifestation at this point. Again, which tells you something about how righteous Moses was. All right, chapter 34. So the first section, now, Moses had broken the tablets, the Ten Commandments. So God tells Moses, again, there's no rebuke of him doing that, but he tells him, says, God, I want you to go make 2 more stone tablets. I want you to bring them back up the mountain, and I will write the commandments on them, just like I did the first time. And again, he says, tell everybody else to stay away from the mountain, but you come up here. Okay, and so God reminds Moses that he is merciful. He's already demonstrated that. But at the same time, he tells Moses, I'm not willing to overlook sin. I will not do that. I am merciful, but there's a limit to that. And I'm not going to overlook sin. And he talks about the consequences. So it's not that the descendants are guilty of the sin of these people, but he's saying their descendants are going to suffer some consequences because of the sins that these people have made. There will be consequences that will go with that. Okay? And we can see, well, that's not fair. Well, do you and I sometimes suffer consequences for other people's sinful behavior? We do, right? A drunk driver kills somebody. Doesn't mean the victim was guilty of what the drunk driver, but they did suffer the consequence of the sin that other person chose to do. So that's what God is saying. There's going to be consequences they're going to suffer because of what these people did. All right, verses 10 through 26, here we see God will renew the covenant. And he promises there will be more miracles. They've already seen the parting of the Red Sea. They saw, of course, the 10 plagues. But there's going to be more miracles to come. Okay? Like when they crossed the Jordan, the walls of Jericho. There's going to be other things ahead. And something really, really, it's all important. This is really important here. God warns them, forbids them, tells them, do not make covenants with the Canaanites. Okay? In fact, he tells them, he doesn't even tell them, you get to this place, you can just don't adopt their ways, but you can coexist with them. He doesn't even tell them that. What does he tell them to do? You do your thing and let them do their thing. Is that what he told them? No. He said, you not only are you not to adapt their ways, you are to destroy their idols. You don't even let them do it. Not only are you not to do it, you don't let them do it either. You make it clear that that's idolatry, and so you must destroy all their religious symbols. Don't worship their gods. Don't have sinful relations with these people. Now, are the Israelites going to obey that? Sadly, they will not. They will violate that over and over and over. And every time they do, it leads to disaster. And it leads to punishment from God. But there are earthly disasters too because of that. And then God's anger. Because what it does is exactly what God knew it would do. Every time they do that, they get pulled away. So instead of the Israelites pulling the Canaanites toward God, the Canaanites pull them away from God, which God knew that's what would happen. So he told them, don't have anything to do with those people. But they're going to do it. So God says, not only do you not make false idols like the calf, but you're to destroy all theirs too, but they're not going to obey that. And again, we see God talks about keeping the feast days, keeping the Sabbath. He reminds them about those things again. So then verses 27 through 35, so Moses goes back up Mount Sinai again. He'll be up there same time period, 40 days and nights, and he fasted while he was there. And we noted earlier that the ones in the Transfiguration, right? Moses and Elijah and Christ, they all fasted for 40 days. So Moses goes back up there. God again writes the 10 Commandments like he did the first time. And then God tells Moses, in addition to those, he tells Moses, I want you to write all of my law in a book. Okay? So what book would that be? One of the ones we're looking at, right? The Pentateuch. All right? So again, more evidence that Moses is in fact the author of these first 5 books of the Bible. And so something interesting here, being in the presence of God does something to Moses. What does it do? It causes his face to shine brilliantly. Right? So much so that to be around other people can't even really look at him, so Moses has to wear a veil when he goes back around, except when he spoke to God, and then he would take the veil off. Okay? And so in 2 Corinthians 3:13 through 16, we notice that, again, for time's sake, we're not going to go read that, but we see that the veil apparently represents the blindness to truth that many people have. Okay, I think you'll know if you go and read those verses, you'll see again the symbolism there. All right, chapter 35. So these last 6 chapters, chapters 35 through 40, last part of the book of Exodus, they chronicle the building of the tabernacle. God is going to reauthorize, they're going to resume doing that. And so in chapter 35, they're given some instructions about how this is going to proceed. Okay, so just a couple of things to note. Again, God tells them you're not to build on the Sabbath day, even though, again, like Larry said a while ago, some people, well, I'm doing it for the Lord. If he said don't do it, don't do it. Right? So he said no construction is to take place on the Sabbath. He tells the people, I want everybody to make offerings. Remember, they took a lot of treasure from Egypt when they left. People make an offering of the materials that are needed to build the tabernacle. And Moses will tell them, here's what I need. So God gives him basically a materials list. Here's what we need to do this. And it tells us that the people gave willfully, they gave cheerfully, probably to atone for the transgression that they had made. So at this point, right now, they have the right attitude. And so then we mentioned earlier, Bezalel and Aholiab, these were 2 men that God said, I'm going to put them in charge of the building. And so Moses announces that to everybody that those 2 guys will do that. All right. Again, a lot of these, we'll go through these last few chapters very, very quickly. So in this chapter, chapter 36, the work begins on the tabernacle. And again, I'm just trying to hit a highlight here, a main thing to know. So the people, it says they brought offerings every morning. And the awesome thing about this is they brought so much stuff, Moses had to tell them to stop. Now that'd be a nice problem for you elders to have, wouldn't it? We don't need any more money, quit bringing us. But that's what he had. They had an overabundance. And Moses said, okay, I've got everything we need. We don't need any more stuff. So that's amazing. That's awesome. Again, probably to try to make up for what they'd done with the calf. But a great example for us today. Be cheerful givers. Be generous. Don't be stingy. Whether it's with our money, our time, our ability, in any way we can serve God, don't be stingy about that. Okay, so then we have, again, we're just kind of running through this because what you have in these last few chapters, a lot of details that, as we said, we don't have to know all these details. They did. But again, God has a purpose for doing this. But what you see here is descriptions. It talks about the inner curtains, the outer curtains, the ram skin, the boards, the bars, some of those. God gives a lot of detail. I want this done this way and this way and this way. So again, the main thing we can learn is what? And he knows exactly what he wants, and when he tells us what he wants, we just need to do that. Right? That's what we get, because again, we don't have to know all these details, but what we do need to know, I think what God is trying to teach us here, he is detail-oriented. He doesn't leave a lot of stuff, well, just do whatever you guys want. You know, he tells us what he wants, and that's what we need to do. Okay, then in chapter 37, it talks about building the Ark of the Covenant. Okay, talks about the table, all these things we've mentioned before, the table of showbread, the candlestick, the altar of incense, the anointing oil. Remember, God had a recipe for that oil, for the incense. You better do it the way I told you to do it. All that's in chapter 37. And the key thing is, it tells us in that chapter, it says everything was done exactly as God commanded. Okay, Moses saw to that. Then in chapter 38, we get some more details. The altar of burnt offering talks about that. Talks about the laver where they wash and cleanse, and the outer court, what that's going to look like. All these things are in chapter 38. And also, interestingly, gives us an accounting of the amount of wealth that had been donated to build the tabernacle. So talking about how generous the people were, right? And so according to some modern estimates, as they try to convert how much would this be worth in today's money, the value of the gold that people smarter than me have calculated said it would come to about $15 million today, and then about $2 million worth of silver. So they had been very generous, and they had given a tremendous amount. And then it gives the number of the men aged 20 and above, because those are the ones that will not go to Canaan. Gives us a more exact number, 603,550 men. Again, that's not counting women and children. That's not counting younger boys. That's the men that were 20 years old and above. All right, and then chapter 39, remember last week we talked about there were certain garments that Aaron had to wear, and his sons, he had 4 sons, and he's the high priest, and they were priests, and they had to wear certain garments. Well, this chapter details the making of those garments. Now, I already showed you a chart last week, and we kind of looked at what that would look like. But you get a lot of details in this chapter about how to create those and what they're going to look like. And so it says that Aaron and his descendants, they're going to serve in the tabernacle, and later his descendants will serve when they no longer need the tabernacle because they have a what? Temple, and they'll serve in the temple as well. So his descendants will continue to do that. And Lord willing, as we go through the remainder of this class, we're going to see a lot of that is discussed in the book of Leviticus, the next book that we hope to look at. It will focus on the work of Aaron and his boys and the priests and what they're supposed to do. Okay. Now, I want you to notice something in chapter 39 at the very end. Look at verses 42 and 43. Critical verses. According to all that the Lord commanded Moses, so the children of Israel made all the work. And Moses did look upon all the work, and behold, they had done it as the Lord had commanded. Even so had they done it, and Moses blessed them. Okay, so again, they didn't deviate. Exactly what God told Moses to do, that's what they did. Okay, so again, we don't have to know all the details. To me, that's what we need to know out of these chapters, that God expects us to obey Him and do what He tells us to do. They had to do it. You and I are supposed to do it today. Okay, then finally, last chapter, chapter 40. So they get everything ready. And so now God gives Moses instructions on how to actually set it all up. Okay? And so then once everything was assembled, God tells Moses, I want you to anoint the tabernacle, the furniture, all the furniture. And remember, he had a special recipe for that, and they were to follow that recipe. You just couldn't anoint it with just whatever you wanted to. And God said, this is done to sanctify it, to make it holy. Okay? Aaron and his sons were washed. They put on the garments. And so now they're ready to serve in the tabernacle. Okay? Now we read in here, it says it was set up, the tabernacle was set up on the first day of the first month of the second year after leaving Egypt. And so if you do the math with other verses, it just means it took them about 6 months to build the tabernacle. But again, the key point, rather than us remembering all the details, the key point is simply Moses did exactly what God told him to do. Okay, again, look at, in chapter 40, look at verse 16. It says, "Thus did Moses, according to all that the Lord commanded him, so did he." So again, is it okay to mostly do what God said? No. Moses did all. In other words, everything that God told him to do, Moses didn't do 99%, and then the other 1%, well, I'm going to decide to do something else. He did everything that God told him to do. Okay? So I think that's the key point in all these concluding chapters. And if I counted right, in chapter 40, there's 38 verses. Now, I know I counted that right. That's pretty simple. But if I counted right, that same phrase that Moses did exactly what God commanded him to do, it appears 8 times in those 38 verses. 8 times, okay? The old school teacher in me, right? Repetition, repetition, repetition. That's how it sticks in there. So God keeps emphasizing that Moses did everything I told him to do. That's what he wants us to get out of this. Again, it shows God is exact. He is detailed, and he wants us to do it his way. So Moses finishes the work. Then Moses enters the tabernacle, the presence of God enters the tabernacle. And it says the glory of God was so great, Moses could not enter. Nobody could enter. And then it tells us that when the cloud of God was on the tabernacle, they stayed put. They didn't move. They didn't go anywhere. Okay? Whenever the cloud lifted, that was God's signal to them, it's time to move. And then again, the cloud would lead them and they would follow the cloud. Okay? But God is going to continue to guide them through the wilderness. And remember again, what did that look like during the day and during the night? Yeah. Cloud pillar in the day and then a pillar of fire at night. Okay. We got just a few minutes left, so we can start this. So this is what I call a summary of the tabernacle. Just some points to remember. So this is kind of to sum up this last part of the book of Exodus, and we won't have time to finish all this tonight. We'll try to finish this up next week and then get into Leviticus. So we stated, of course, at the beginning of the class, we're no longer under the law of Moses. We know that. But there are a lot of things that we can learn from the Old Testament. That's why God said it is written for our learning and admonition. And so some main points to remember as we study the old, not just Exodus, but really the entire Old Testament. But specifically, we see in this book, remember that God delivered the Israelites from Egyptian bondage. Okay? So that's what he did for him, or for them. What does he do for us? Okay, Christ delivers us from the bondage of sin because of his sacrifice on the cross. Okay? So there is a correlation between what's going on in Exodus and what we see in the New Testament, the covenant that you and I are under. So God will deliver for those that are obedient to him. Okay, we see here that Moses was their deliverer through God, right? He was the deliverer, he was the lawgiver. Who is ours? Christ. Okay. And then we also note that the waters of the Red Sea separated them from their bondage to the Egyptians. And the waters of baptism separate us from the bondage of our sins. So there's that correlation between the two. Okay, so we're going to look at what are called types and antitypes, and we'll define that, but there are a lot of these shadows, if you will, in the Old Testament that point to things in the New Testament, things that are going to be fulfilled. You know, the Old Testament will prophesy and predict, and then they will be fulfilled in the New Testament. And there are quite a few of these that are related to the tabernacle. Okay? So Hebrews 10 and verse 1, for the law having a shadow of good things to come, and not the very image things, can never with those sacrifices which they offered year by year continually make the comers thereunto perfect. Okay, this is also alluded to in Hebrews chapter 8. Let's see. All right, we'll wrap it up with this. So we got, notice we talked about this earlier, but quick review, the tabernacle had 3 parts. So you've got the outer court. In the outer court, it has 2 pieces of furniture. 2 pieces of furniture. The brazen altar, which was for animal sacrifice. And what else did it have? The laver for them to wash and cleanse themselves, right? So the outer court surrounded the tabernacle. And so you got the brazen altar for animal sacrifice, and you got the laver where the priests would wash when they enter. And then the tent, the tabernacle itself has 2 rooms in it. So you've got the holy place. It has 3 pieces of furniture. And remember, God told them what to put in there and where to put it. Okay, so it's got the golden candlestick, which provided the only light there. It's got the table of showbread. It's got 12 loaves of bread on it that only the priest could eat. Nobody else could do that. And then it has the altar of incense. Aaron would burn it. No animal sacrifice on that altar, just burning the incense. So the candlestick, the table of showbread, the altar of incense, they are in the holy place. And then what's the other one called? The most holy place. That is separated by a veil. And what's in there? One thing, really. The Ark of the Covenant. And remember, the cherubims are on the seal, the top of the ark, and that's where the presence of God would come to, in the most holy place. Okay? So the tabernacle, that was the place where God met with man, where worship was offered. The Church of Christ today is where God meets with man, and our worship is offered. So again, you have a correlation between the tabernacle and the church. Okay. So we will have to stop there. We will pick it up next time. We'll talk a little bit more about what each of these 3 parts of the tabernacle represent. Again, we're going to look at what are called types and antitypes, and Lord willing, we'll do that next time. So thank you all for your kind attention. I really appreciate it.